I got an email from my director. I read it at night and I was tired and all these things. This guy was just trashing me in this email. And I fired off an email back to him. It's like, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm so offended. I can't believe you did this. And I can't believe you wrote that to the medical director. And came back in the next morning. I re-looked at the email with some freshness after some sleep and whatever. I read the email. I was like, he was being funny. We have these thoughts. And the problem is not that we have these thoughts. The problem is that we believe them.
What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the School Struggle Podcast. It is our belief that the only guarantee in life is that we are all going to struggle, and how we choose to embrace our struggles is what empowers us to become the best versions of ourselves. How is it going? My name is Pete, coming to you from Heartland, Vermont. And with me tonight is one of my favorite people to talk to, and I'm so psyched that he made time to join me on the mic this evening. I'd love to introduce Dr. William Bill Slammon. What's up, Wild Bill? How's it going?
I'm doing great, Mr. Driscoll. I love coming on the podcast, so thank you so much for the invitation.
I just love my informal conversations with you. When I see you in person, I always run up and give you a hug and don't even give you the opportunity to run away, which I love. It's awesome to have you in my life and you on the microphone for fun, informal conversation. But on the formal side, I love all that you bring to the table. And just to set the table for the listeners here, you are a clinical psychologist. You're the clinical director of the entire school district that I teach in, Hartford School District. And basically, you provide support or partner with mental health clinicians, school counselors, teachers, administrators, and alternative services that go on throughout the district. Dr. Bill knows this stuff. And what I love about your ability to talk to me, Dr. Bill, is that you take the complex stuff and you put it in layman's terms for someone like me. Put in that fifth grade lingo that I can understand, and I'm super grateful for that. So thank you.
Just so you know, I actually have to do that for myself because that's the only way I can make sense of it. So I'm glad it works, helps you, but I have to do that for me too.
I once heard someone say, like, to understand complex things takes a high level of intelligence. To be able to break it down to make it someone who doesn't understand complex things takes a genius. So no pressure.
Yeah, I don't think we'll go that far, but okay.
So tonight, I'm really excited for the topic that you and I have been chewing on for months now. We just haven't got a chance to get on the mics and hit the record button. And that is about triggers. So I'm going to take you kind of into my history of teaching and kind of set the stage for this by sharing the following. About 10 years ago, I was teaching my classes and somebody asked me, like, if I was going to focus on the most important things for my overall health and wellness of the mind and of the body, what should I focus on? So I kind of thought for a while, as in like days and weeks, and put together this plan. And I thought the plan would be to focus on aspects or factors or pillars of health that are of the body. And to me, those were exercise and nutrition. And then I thought, what are of the mind? Well, at the time, I was doing a lot of looking into the power of gratitude. So I thought gratitude and then relationships. So I had of the body was exercise and nutrition, of the mind was gratitude and relationships. And then I thought sleep encumbers all of those and helps with the health of the body and health of the mind. Lo and behold, I was listening to a podcast many years later called Chasing Excellence, and it's actually brought forth by an incredibly intelligent human being by the name of Ben Bergeron, who actually was the lead trainer in my certification course for the first time I became certified as a CrossFit trainer. You have to go back and do it every 5 years, but the first time I did it, close to 20 years ago, he was a lead trainer. So I really got into his stuff, and he does a lot of mindset stuff. He's written a couple books. He leads this podcast called Chasing Excellence, which is fantastic. And he basically broke it down, and I couldn't believe that he was kind of on the same plane as I was, because it was just really cool. Instead of calling them the pillars of health, he called them the factors of health, and he called them the 5 factors. And he said it's how we move, how we eat, how we think, how we connect, and how we recover. And I was like, holy crap. How we move is what I was saying about exercise. How we eat is what I was saying about nutrition. How we think is what I was saying about gratitude, mindset stuff, and how we connect is what I was saying about relationships. And then he was saying how we recover. That's the sleep piece. I was like, wow, that is amazing. Like, he put it in different words, but we were kind of on the same plane as to what I call them the 5 pillars of health. He calls them the 5 factors. And this summer I was listening to some of his stuff, and he said, I think somebody asked a question like, if you were going to introduce a 6th pillar or a sixth factor, what would that be? And he immediately responded like he already knew what he wanted to say. And it was the ability to recognize our emotional triggers in situations throughout life. And then he went on to talk about the importance of when you feel an intense feeling, recognizing that, the awareness piece, and then what you do with that, right? The intentional and then the action piece. So I said to you many months ago, hey, I'd love for you to come on and talk about emotional triggers. And you're like, yeah, absolutely. I don't know a whole lot about this, and I'm certainly not great at recognizing my own triggers, but I think where I'd love to start, if you're cool with it, Dr. Slammon, is to first kind of identify, define, explain what the term trigger means for you and the work that you do, and then we'll kind of go from there. I did some research prior to chatting with you tonight, and I have some stuff that I can share as well as far as the trigger stuff, but I want to kind of turn it over to you and let you lead off the conversation about this.
That sounds good. So when I hear the word trigger, I kind of think on a couple of levels. The word trigger is sort of I don't want to demean it in any way by saying it's in vogue, but it's certainly been part of the vocabulary as so many parts of our community in the world, right, are talking about the impact of trauma. I just did a trauma workshop in early September that had all the major trauma thinkers in the world at this workshop, and there was some consensus that it's very rare for any human being to not have been impacted by some level of trauma. And they would kind of distinguish between sort of like capital T trauma, that's like really big stuff that we all like know about and easy to identify. And then like lowercase t trauma, which is sort of the trauma of everyday life. And depending on a variety of things like our temperament and our life experiences and all these things, like we've all processed these very stressful things. We all have stressful things in our lives, and we have various degrees of ability to process them well and fully. And almost all of us have something, right? So and I should go back a little bit more and say, I don't know that these are necessarily distinguishable, but the word trigger comes up a lot when we think about people's trauma and trauma history. You hear about college professors, or even when people are giving talks publicly, like they give trigger warnings, right? When there's content that might be triggering to people. So that's the stuff that's been getting a lot of attention lately, whether it's in social media or in university settings or whatever. But then there's just and this is very much my experience and opinion. It isn't based on necessarily reading or research or anything I've done. Then there's just there are the things that when they happen to us, we become almost automatically reactive to them. And often, as you just suggested, Pete, we're not even fully aware in the moment, at least, why. Like somebody does something, somebody says something, somebody looks at us funny, somebody says something with a certain tone of voice, or they use certain words, and all of a sudden we notice that we're having like a physiological response, we're having an emotional response. And like I said, maybe these things like that kind of reaction, which is just like normal human reaction, that may not be like fully tied or connected to trauma. But then there's the part of like there are people who have had trauma of various degrees, and there are life events or things people do and say that are sort of triggering of the trauma. And I do think of them as somewhat separate, but but again, I'm just putting out there that maybe they're not separate. So the purposes of this discussion, at least for the moment, let's kind of focus. I'm thinking, if I'm hearing you correctly, let's focus on the kind of normal life triggers, right? The kind of automatic reactions we have to things that are like sometimes at the smallest level, like my mother used to refer to them as pet peeves. We typically don't have big emotional reactions to our pet peeves, but it's sort of like that, right? Somebody does something, they say something a certain way, they chew their food a certain way, and we just have this reaction. I know what you're talking about is bigger than that, right? It's not, you're not talking about little small
Well,
reactions.
well really, kind of the whole gamut, right? Because
Yeah.
I shared in the last episode that it's so funny that the listeners of this podcast, a third are under the age of 18, and a third are between 18 and 40, and a third are older than 40. So, like, I'm trying to come up with content that really applies to everybody. And I think what you just said really nails it. Like, we all have reactions, responses in different levels that this conversation applies to all of us. So when you were talking, I was thinking my dad is a fairly anxious person and always has been. And if we spilled milk or any drink at the table while we were having a meal, like it was a really big deal. So like if somebody spilled milk, my heart rate would would elevate, and I'd start to get like hot in the face and all these things. And that was even like if I was out with my friends at a restaurant and someone spilled a drink, like that was my response.
You were triggered.
I was triggered.
Yeah.
And so that was just kind of like an everyday thing. Like for me, I wouldn't define my response to spilled drink as trauma, but maybe in a way it was, depending on one's definition of trauma. But like these little things that apply to all of us, I think is exactly where I wanted to start the conversation. So, Dr. Slammon, before we dive into this, I forgot to share with the listeners that right before we were about to log in here, Todd sent us a text and said things were unraveling at home. I don't know what that meant, but usually it's something related to the grandchildren invading the house. So he's going to jump on with us when he can. Just want to give the listeners a heads up that if Todd joins mid-show, he's dealing with his triggers.
There he is.
There he is, just in time.
Yeah, here's the thing. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. I got a hell of an echo in here, but that's all right. You got to plug in the headphone jack all the way into the headphones. That's.
Oh, you got to push it all the way in, yeah.
Yeah. Like I've never been on a podcast before. I don't know.
Yeah, we're just getting started. We talked about how all humans have some level of response to different things that set them off.
So part of what I was saying is that I think it's a pretty common human experience that we have things that we have these almost automatic reactions to, and the reactions are emotional, they're physiological, and frequently I think to ourselves, they don't always, unless we really think about them and really do a little deep diving into what they're about, they often don't make sense. They're not necessarily like objectively, they're like, why would that bother me kind of thing. But I can tell you, as someone who's been around for a little while, like I am still, I turned 62 just a couple of weeks ago. It's like I'm kind of amazed at how much I'm still having to work on these things. I'm still having to pay attention to the things that trigger me. How some things that have triggered me since I was a child still trigger me, and how much it distorts my perception of what's actually happening, right? Because when I'm triggered by something, it often, the trigger is coming from a misperception of what almost always is coming from a misperception of what is actually happening. The one other thought I want to share, and I'll be quiet, is that I think, and this I think you guys would probably agree with, there's a great importance to us paying attention to those things, to those triggers, to try to understand them. And then also, and Pete, you I think had suggested this either earlier when we were talking or before we started, that there's great value in us being able to find ways to sort of anticipate them, like to kind of see them coming. And I think that's an art in itself, to be able to recognize, like see the circumstances that trigger them, and then kind of develop, and we can talk more about this later, but to develop a plan, like for this is what I'm going to do when this thing happens, if that makes sense, I hope.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me on a number of different tiers. One, I don't know if tiers is the right word, number of different perspectives. One, for myself entirely in the relationships that I'm in. Two, to see it in my students. And then three, to see it in my daughter. And what's interesting is my daughter's 9 now, and I'm in tune enough that oftentimes I can see the thing coming. We'll call it the stimulus for this conversation. The stimulus that's going to set her off, I can see that coming. And I know what that big blowout response is going to be. How cool would it be for a 9-year-old to be able to see that coming and be able to kind of cut it off at the path? So the response, the big, strong feeling, the reaction, I think is more of a reaction than a response, isn't as intense. Yeah, just that ability to recognize what sets us off or what triggers us, it can really, really negate a lot of hardship in our life, I think.
And I actually think it's not a lot of people just accept their, what we're calling triggers. They just accept them as facts of life. And I don't think I think a lot of people assume they have no control over them.
I agree. It's like a muscle.
Yeah.
You have to train that muscle. I really, really, I really believe that. Yeah.
And one of a concept that has been so helpful and freeing to me is the notion that virtually everything is a habit, right? Everything that we do and all our reactions, they feel automatic, they feel out of our control only because they're so habitual. But there's so much hope and optimism in the notion of them being habits, because you can change habits, you can break habits, you can create new habits, right? I mean, you guys talk about that, I know, a lot, and that's a
Just
big.
the mindset of knowing that this is within our control to a certain degree is really, I think it's really reassuring for me as myself, as a teacher, and as a parent. Todd, I know this is a conversation you've been super excited about having for a while. And when it looked like you might not be joining us, we were talking about before we hit record that we were bummed out that you might be missing out on this. I'm really psyched that you're able to join us. As you've been sitting and listening since you joined a couple minutes ago, what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'm always interested in triggers. I've read a few books about it. Maybe that's what I was thinking, because last time we talked about it, I went on a deep dive into a couple books. Interestingly enough, and in synchronicity circles, it always happens with, especially you two. I don't know what it is. I haven't listened to an audiobook in, I don't even know, months, probably almost a year. But I started listening to one yesterday, and it's Thich Nhat Hanh, as I think is his name. I can never pronounce it, and it's called Peace in Every Step, and it talks about almost exactly what we're talking about. Because as you guys are, it's not necessarily about triggers, but it's about our response through awareness and a virtual understanding, or I guess a complete understanding as humans, that these things seem habitual, just like you said, but actually, if we are able to, sit, and it's meditation based. So if you sit in mindfulness and you realize that these things are happening, and you're able to sit with it and get close to it and go through it, you'll realize that no, actually these are choices, or actually these are underlying behaviors that you have to get to the root of. I'm currently listening to one about fear, but it's basically, I think, any emotion. That if you sit with it long enough and you dive into it long enough, you begin to realize that you're separate from these things. And I think that a lot of people do habituate, and they, their response is so fast and so ingrained that they don't even realize that they have a choice to even begin to look at these things. So it's just, oh, that's the way it's always been, or this is how I always respond, or even worse, when you get into layers of family, that's how dad always reacts, or that's, grandpa did that, so dad does that, so now I must do that. And it's so interesting to think about triggers, not only triggers to us personally, but like how they evolve, or how we accept or overtake them from previous generations, and circumstances in our own lives, that we know that just adds another piece that we never even rarely realize. So yeah, very interesting.
Todd, before you jumped on, I was giving an example from my life that if a drink was spilled while my dad was sitting at the table, it was a big deal, and that was it elicited all these like uncomfortable feelings for me, with the elevated heart rate and face getting hot and all these things. And a win for my life is that when a drink spills at the table now that I'm sitting at, my daughter doesn't seem to have the same nervous response that I did. And it's just like I was able to break that. And that's like a complete win for me. Now, I hear my dad's voice in mine when I react to many other things that she does, but it's really neat to know that we do have the power to kind of break the cycle, if you will, or to break the mold with the way that we were raised. But it does take that conscious level of awareness and that intention to make that happen.
Do you consider that a win for you personally, or a win for her that she doesn't have to watch you do that?
I think it's more a win for me, because
Yeah.
she's not even aware. So I think it's a win for her as well. It's one less thing that she's going to be anxious about. But there was all these things that my dad had. Like he didn't know how to fix anything. Like I think he was raised by a father who didn't really know how to fix much, so he wasn't taught how to fix stuff. So when stuff broke, like it was a really big deal. Whenever an appliance broke in my family, it was like the end of the world. Like the dishwasher broke, the microwave broke, the stove broke. Like, oh, we're gonna have to replace it, and we don't have the money to do that. And that was like anytime an appliance would break. And I remember when I bought this house, this is the first house I bought, one of the appliances went like within the first month. And I was like, all right, this is my chance to not be upset. I can do this.
How did you come about the response to realize that that's the trigger, right? Like, is there a point in your life where you would have been like, oh, it's all falling apart, there goes the heater, right? Like, where did you learn that?
When I moved out and I realized that other people didn't have that same response as my father, I learned that what I thought was normal might not be normal. and that there could be a different way. So seeing other people that responded differently than my father. I live with a bunch of roommates all throughout the course of like 2 decades. I live with some cousins that when stuff broke, they just kind of dealt with it as this is something that's part of life, and it's not something that we need to lose our mind about. And I think there's a couple things, like for me, that's like, all right, when I become a parent, I'm gonna come hell or high water, I'm gonna make sure that this. And it's like I was like, when appliance breaks in my house, I don't want my daughter to be scared for a week or trying to figure out how to get it replaced. And when the milk spills. And the other big one for me is no skateboards or ball in the house. Like we weren't allowed to toss a ball around, and we weren't allowed to skateboard in the house. I was like, when I buy a house, my daughter can skateboard wherever she wants in the house, and she can throw a ball wherever she wants. And when I bought the house, I called my dad and I was like, I just want to let you know I'm skateboarding in my living room right now.
What do you say?
He's like, yeah, it's your house. You do whatever you want. But yeah,
that's great.
But you still can't skateboard in my house, is what he said.
But Todd, you mentioned fear, and I did a little homework prior to this episode. I was looking to see what is the importance of recognizing emotional triggers, and how it is crucial for self-awareness, emotional regulation, staving off that intense response. What the internet helped me come up with was a list of 10 that are kind of the big ones, so to speak. And Dr. Slammon, you could chime in and agree or disagree with this. This is just the internet, so but I mean, it's got to be right if it's on the internet, right?
Only the internet.
Who are we to question? Who are we to question?
They are rejection, abandonment, criticism, failure, loss, injustice, betrayal, isolation, change, and success. And then it goes on to kind of explain each one. Like success, achieving goals can bring about fear of new expectations or pressure that we put on ourselves. It kind of gives a little description for each one, but I thought that was an interesting look into, like, if I ask the why, what does it kind of boil down to? And does it fall into one of those 10 or something else? I don't know.
What's interesting for me personally, when I hear that list, as soon as you said the word criticism, it was like bright lights, flags, everything started flashing and going off in my head. And so I am super, I think it's accurate to say I'm super reactive to perceived criticism from outside. I mean, I'm really good at criticizing myself, don't get me wrong, but if I perceive someone else is criticizing me, and I would say like 98% of the time, their intention is not to be critical, but that's what I hear. When we have another like 2 or 3 hour episode, I can tell you all about where that came from. I know exactly where it came from, is childhood, parents, the whole thing. The degree to which this particular trigger has influenced the course of my life, it has influenced my behavior, it has influenced my decisions, my willingness to be vulnerable, my willingness to expose myself to feedback, and avoiding those situations as much as possible for fear of being criticized. It's very powerful for me, and something to this day that I still have to work on. Like, my wife can say something to me, which if anyone else was in the room, they would say, it was totally benign comment, statement, request, question, whatever. But I can feel it, like it just, something tightens, in my stomach and chest. And then I have this, like, I get reactive, snappy, defensive, all those things. And she's kind of looking at me like, what the hell is wrong with you? Now I've gotten to a point where I can say, I'm really sensitive to criticism. She's like, well, I wasn't criticizing you. I'm like, yeah, but you have to remember that I hear almost everything as, like, I overgeneralize. I totally overgeneralize. Like, when it comes to that one particular thing, my defenses are so massive still. And I've been working on this forever. Now I've made huge improvements. But still, that is such a powerful one for me. And I can say that finally, after a number of decades, I'm finally at a place where, like, I've tried to turn it around, frankly. I've tried to welcome, even if it literally is criticism, which is almost never actual criticism. It's usually like feedback or suggestion. I've tried to turn it around and say, like, I welcome this. This will make me a better person, or this will make me better at this thing that they're giving me feedback around. Instead of becoming defensive, I'm going to listen to it. I'm going to allow myself to be open to it. Nothing bad is going to happen. But that's partly that's taken me feeling better about myself in order to be able to then be more tolerant of that thing that triggers so much anxiety and fear in me.
Yes. Welcome to being human. This happens
Yeah,
to me
yeah, yeah.
too, and very much in the same, very a similar vein. I wonder though, kind of the same question that I proposed to Peter is, I think a lot of the people that listen to us, hopefully, or in my mind, are people who are like, yeah, that's me too, but what am I supposed to do about that? Like, where's that entry point to being okay with sitting, or knowing myself well enough to know that I respond in this way? So you say I've been working for decades, and that's awesome, because that's one key point is it never ends. Like, we never stop working on these things. It's not like you just solve it, right? So I think that's number one, what my takeaway is. But number two is, how do you how did you begin to realize I am so critical that this manifests in a way that it affects all of those different things in my life? You know, like how did you begin to plot a course to do that work?
That's a good question. I think one of the things was years ago, 30 years ago, I started to recognize time. I mean, and the thing is, it didn't happen publicly very often, but when it happened, it was usually big. And what I realized was I was often misperceiving people's intentions when they would say something to me. And the biggest one was I was in a new job. I got an email from my director that was also CC'd or to, maybe directed, and I was CC'd to the medical director of the clinic. And I read it at night and I was tired and all these things. And the way I read it was that this guy was just trashing me in this email. And I fired off an email back to him. It's like, how dare you, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm so offended. I can't believe you did this. And I can't believe you wrote that to the medical director. And I came in the next morning, right? And this is like before smartphones and everything. So like we weren't like texting and doing all these things after hours. Came back in the next morning. I re-looked at the email, and with some freshness after some sleep and whatever, I read the email. I was like, he was being funny. This was all meant to be humorous. And I was just like, oh my, and that was for me. That's the thing I remember. I'm sure there were other instances,
Yeah.
but that was one of the things I remember. It's like, you idiot. Like, you just sent this really angry, email to your
Rant.
boss.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And not only were you wrong, but like, you totally misread what he was actually being a cool guy. He was trying to be funny and just like saying dumb stuff and being funny. And he was that way. Like, I should have known, like he was always joking around. But that was a huge wake up for me. I was like, oh my goodness, like this could have affected. Fortunately, he has a great sense of humor. And I went to him. I'm like, Jim, I am so sorry. I totally misread your email. And he's like, yeah, I kind of thought that might be the case. Like, totally understanding. But that was my first real wake up call. I was probably around 30 or something, and maybe a little bit older. And I was just like, I need to really start paying attention to and really listening to what people are saying to me. And if I have a reaction, at least initially, I need to really check it and do some fact checking, so to speak, to make sure I'm having and I kind of went the other direction. I started becoming almost like too reluctant to react, like afraid to have my honest feelings because I question them. What
Yeah.
if I'm wrong? What if I'm misreading this situation? And that became a problem.
Yeah.
A-
Analysis
a-
paralysis, right? Like, you're stuck in it. Like,
Oh, exactly. Like, I'm
yeah.
afraid to react. I'm afraid to not react. And so I feel like I've made like a ton of progress, but I think the message, at least I'm trying to communicate to folks, is like, this takes work. Like, it's one thing to go from it being an automatic reaction that you don't even think twice about. You just define it as like, that's just who I am, right? But if you're interested in how your behavior impacts on other people and how it affects your life, the way you think, the way you behave, then it begins by being willing to look at it, and then by developing some. I love what you're talking about with Thich Nhat Hanh. Like, not that everyone has to do meditation, but you need to be able to sort of separate yourself from it and to be able to be an observer of your own process, your own reactions to things, so that you can get, like, as much as it is possible to do, a little bit of an objective look at, like, oh wow, that's what happens. Like, someone says that, and then I have this reaction. Speaking of Buddhism, I had a Buddhist teacher who used to say that we have these thoughts, and the problem is not that we have these thoughts. The problem is that we believe them. We
Yep.
believe the thoughts, right? And so that's been my work. It's been to realize that my emotional reaction might be valid, And I just need to be mindful and aware of how, if I'm reading things correctly, and so I've developed ways to kind of check myself without being totally inhibited from responding.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, like for all of us, it's a work in progress, like lifetime, but
yeah.
progress
It's
nonetheless.
yeah. It's kind of like coaching. Like it's all these little cues you learn. It's like, oh, that works for this guy. Maybe I can help somebody by sharing that from what I see of your situation. There was a gal I used to work with, and she told me one thing one day. I was so surprised. Somebody came up, and I observed this conversation between them in this workplace setting. And one person was clearly just agitated, like right off the bat. Like you could tell the way they were walking up to her, like the body language, the whole thing. And this lady was known for like just giving it right back. Like, oh, I'm like, here comes the fireworks. I'm just gonna watch this thing happen. And she took a totally different stance than I had anticipated. And so after it was all done, and the whole situation was kind of diffused, I went back over there and I asked her, and she said, I learned this thing in meditation. And she said, I try to put myself in the other person's shoes and wonder what I look like to them. And like, they're like so anticipating the response, that this lady has garnered years to cultivate. And then she's like, oh, I'm sorry, something completely different. And it just changes the entire narrative. And so I started thinking to myself, how am I appearing to these people? And like,
Mhm.
what is it that I can learn from what they might see me as? And I think that kind of back to that book, but a lot of it is curiosity. Like I have to be curious about what that person thinks. And that's why I'm interested right now is like, I found that curiosity somewhere. I don't know what it was, but I'm interested in how other people happen across that kind of curious thinking or cultivate that kind of curious thinking, because it's not something that I've ever seen in my kids or my wife or my family or in any of my experience. That someday you're just, oh, I'm just curious because I went through these steps. It just happens. I don't know. That's what I'm trying to get to. So, anyways, yeah, thanks for sharing. That's a great story. Keep up the good work.
And what you just said, Todd, reminds me, both as a psychotherapist and just as a human being with other people I know and care about, that when I see someone respond differently to a situation that they have a sort of a habitual way of responding, like that's when I know they're growing. That's when I know they're making progress. Just because, like every other time, there'd be fireworks like that, like the woman you were just talking about. Every other time they would respond in this characteristic way, which would be often, it's unpleasant, off-putting, whatever. But then there's the next time and they respond like totally differently. I mean, chill, maybe some emotion, but it's like a positive,
Noticeably
like,
different. Yeah.
and then it's like, oh, they're doing some work and they're making progress, and that is so awesome to witness.
Yeah. You have to know somebody pretty well though, and their track record, right? So maybe that's part of
Absolutely.
it. Yeah, yeah. Peter.
That's one of the really cool things about working with students over the course of age 14 to 18 is to see that. And there's a really stark difference between almost like the ninth and 10th graders and then the 11th and 12th graders. They just, when that self-confidence and that self-belief starts to build, that insecurity drops, and those really strong responses start to drop. At least that's my anecdotal observations. One thing that I'm curious about, it's, I feel like it's very hard for me to keep up with the latest terminology in any field, not just professionally, but just like on the streets. But I heard recently kids with big feelings, like big feeling kids. And I'm thinking to myself, what kid doesn't have big feelings? That's just like saying kids, right? But my mom shared something with me that had something to do with kids with big feelings. And she was saying, maybe this would be helpful with your daughter. I think what I'm coming to learn and where I see her big responses, her big reactions is stuff that I had big feelings for when I was her age. And my wife would be like, I have no idea why she's acting that way. And I'll be like, I know exactly why she's acting that way. And even now, my big feelings often come from, Todd, what you talk about often is buried deep somewhere in there is shame. Like if I don't have shame, I normally don't have a big response. But when I know I'm in the wrong, or I know that my shortcomings being called out on, or I'm insecure about one of my shortcomings, that's when I have a big response. So it's like oftentimes if my daughter knows she should be getting ready for bed, but she's sneaking off and continuing to work on her art project after we've asked her 6 or 7 times, and then she has this big response, I know. Because you have shame that you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing right now. And I think there's layers of that in there, at least for me, for sure.
Yeah, I think shame is. I think it's one of the pillars of fear and a host of other emotions. Is I remember Bill was saying he could feel it in his chest and he could feel it in his throat. Like that's where I feel shame a lot. Like that's usually the precursor. Like I can feel this, and then I'm like, am I doing what I'm not supposed to be doing? Like, should I be doing? Not to shit all over the place, but is this in line with the things that I hope to aspire to be, right? And then yeah, I mean it just carries you away like a tidal flood, like before you know it.
Yeah, I still have those moments, right? When even if it's a legit, like getting called out on something or a legit criticism, I have those moments like I am like 10, 12 years old again and just feel like I am a piece of crap. Like my internal reaction is so extreme and so it's also inaccurate. I mean, but it's remarkable how quick and easy it still is for that stuff to get triggered, like we're talking about. And it's the shame, it's the inadequacy, it's all the things. It's
Interesting.
powerful.
Yeah. When you say you went back and you figured out the root of at least one one or more of your underlying behaviors, could you do that yourself, or is it only through the education that you have that you realize that those doors exist? Like where would you begin to look if you were like, man, I wish I could really get to the bottom of why I feel this way? Because I hear this in self-help books all the time. You got to find the root of this. You need to sit with it and go back and look for it. But when I go back and look for anything, it's just like rifling through a closet full of randomly loose papers. Like I don't know where to start. I don't know where to begin. So I wondered if you had any insight on that.
That's a really good question. So I think my professional training has been helpful to me in terms of understanding and being able and willing to look at some of my stuff. But I also, as I've said before, I study Buddhism, and that's probably been the most helpful. To acknowledge that this is sort of the human condition and to generate some compassion and patience for myself, and then just to have motivation to. So I feel like sometimes we're able to look at our stuff honestly, and I would say sometimes, like in a way, that's where it doesn't even necessarily need to be a therapist, like official therapist kind of person, but someone who can be like a therapist who can help reflect back to us, help us look at hard things about ourselves, to have that almost like a facilitator of some fashion that can then like help us really pay attention to that stuff, because it can be really hard to look at on our own because it's hard
Yeah.
stuff, and it's like stuff we don't necessarily want to have to face or deal with. We just want people to like us and leave us alone.
Mental mediator.
My question for you, Dr. Slammon, is, and I think that this question can be asked on behalf of everybody, like every human. From what you understand, what are like some clear physiological signs that I'm being triggered or that somebody is being triggered? I'm certain that when I was my daughter's age, I did not have the ability to recognize any of that. I just got upset, and that's who I was, and that's why I was. But if I could say to my daughter or one of my students or my parents, now we're talking age 9, age 18, and age 76, what are some signs that I can recognize within myself to take a preventative approach toward having a less intense response?
Right. So I would say that there isn't a single answer, that it's going to be specific to every individual person. Right. So for me, it's a knot in my stomach. That is and often like a tightness in my chest. But like I also know that like I hold a lot of my emotion in my chest. Like I've had back pain, like problematic back pain in the past. And after doing some work with massage therapists and things, like I've learned that it's not my back that's the problem. It's that like I'm holding all the emotions in my chest, and therefore I create this tightness in my torso, and it ends up spasming and blah blah blah. So, but I think that's actually like that's each individual's job, is to part of that process, part of that developing awareness to better understand, before you even try to understand why you're having the triggers, to understand the process of having a reaction, is to pay attention to like, what was I feeling just before this started?
Yeah.
And there are researchers that would say that invariably we have a physiological reaction before we have a concept of an emotion. And so paying attention to what our characteristic physiological reactions are. Like, so my go-to for almost everything, anxiety, worry, fear, vulnerability, is like a knot in my stomach that usually radiates into a tightness in my chest. But I know other people that their shoulders get super tense and stiff, and their neck gets sore, they get a headache, or there's a whole range of other, their gut starts to feel like kind of woozy. So
Yeah,
I really think it's different for different people, for
yeah,
everybody.
yeah. And like I kind of shared in the milk example, for me, it's like I can feel the heart rate going up. My face gets hot. My ears get hot. Those types of things.
Yeah. So I think the answer is there isn't a single response, but there are ways for us to try to learn to pay attention to the response we have.
It's a great answer. One for me is definitely if two people in the room disagree, and it can be a light disagreement, but if they disagree, I'll start to like feel that. And I think part of that, Todd, you talked about the kind of the family history, is tough conversations were avoided at all costs in my family. So I didn't really have the skills to like work through them or cope through them. So I just avoid them. And a prime example of that is like we're kind of right in the thick. We are right in the thick of election season. As we record this, we're less than a month away from the election, and I just teach fitness. And I just keep it fitness in my classes because I'm too scared to go anywhere else. And that's just one example from my life. What about you, Todd? What do you recognize within yourself, or what can give you a strong response?
I'm big on justice. When I see injustice, man, it really gets me going. Like inequality of rules, inequality of people's feeling. Especially, I notice this a lot in my current workplace. People feel like they're othered a lot by people who they work with or who they have worked with a long time. And when you boil it down, when I go to investigate a little bit more behind the scenes, I realize it's because either they're not receiving the same information or it's skewed in a way that elicits a response in them, like almost purposely. And it drives me nuts. Like I just want to go get to the bottom of it, get everybody in one room, all the people who I feel are involved, and be like, we need to get to the bottom of this right now. And that's a lot of times that's way too forward for many people, especially in the blue collar field. They're like, whoa, what's this guy's trying to trying to disarm all these bombs? It's like, but it's so easy if we have to all just get on the same page, it would just half of the problems that exist here would be way less, substantially less. But I've noticed a lot of times when people get treated either unfairly from what I know, what I understand the just cause to be, or if or it's even worse if I feel like I'm treated unfairly, that'll really get me going. But I mean, to the point where I will just almost just focus only on that thing to a fault till I figure it out. And I've heard my wife say a few times, like, there's other things going on here. You can't just focus on that one thing. And I'm like, yeah, but this thing is, in my mind, it pervades everything else. Like, this is the root of so many other things that we could be taking care of. And sometimes it's crazy. Like, here's an example from today. In Washington State, part-time employees can be forced to work mandatory overtime. Now, I don't know why they wouldn't just call that scheduled work, but it's mandatory overtime. The only thing that you have on your side is they have to compensate you more money to do that. So basically, they can just say, we need you to work 7 days a week, and we'll just pay you extra for anything over 40 hours a week. And that just seems unfair to me. Like, when I got hired, you told me it was part-time, 4 days a week, and now suddenly I'm working 7 days a week because the law says you can do that. And so I'm like over here telling my wife, like, she's like, that doesn't seem right. I was like, I will go to Congress. I will go so far because it's clearly not right. And then, there's a little clause in there that says, except for people in the healthcare field. And I'm like, I got to find those people in the healthcare field to figure this out because it's so crazy. It's just, but that's how far my mind goes. And it'll just keep going if I don't stop it. But I know that about myself. So sometimes I rein it in. At least I try to get it going in one direction with a stop. But yeah, that's my big one.
I like how he kind of brought three very different examples to the table for the conversation from our lives, which is really cool. As we start to wrap up, Dr. Slammon, as far as this topic on triggers goes, is there any piece any stone that we've left unturned as far as the goals for the conversation tonight?
I mean, we could probably talk about this for several hours, right? So it's hard to cover everything, and hopefully we'll come back to it another time. The only thing I'll mention, which something either Pete, you or Todd had said earlier made me think of it, and I'm probably not going to do it total justice, but to paraphrase Viktor Frankl, right, from
Just talking about him this week.
Man's Search for Meaning.
Yes, sir.
I believe it's a quote from him, and it's often quoted, and that is that, it was when you were talking about your daughter. You were talking about sort of stimulus and response, right? Because that's kind of what we're talking about, right? The trigger is the stimulus, and then we have our response. And Viktor Frankl says something like, between stimulus response, the gap between stimulus response is like where freedom lives. Because in that space between the stimulus and our response, we have the ability to choose, despite the fact that we often feel we don't have the ability to choose, right? Especially like for those of us working with kids and working with teenagers, if you try to suggest to them that they have control over their reactions to things, they'll tell you, you are effing crazy.
Yeah.
Like this is out of their control. Like this person just did this and said this, and I have no...
This is who I am.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's part of that maturation you were talking about, right? You take a kid who's 14 and then 4 years later, and they're like, are you the same person? Because like you now have impulse control. You now have the ability to have a mature conversation, etc. But I've always loved that concept. And I say that to myself. I remind myself when I'm triggered. This thing just happened. Like I try to pause. I try to hit the pause button. I try to take a breath. And I try to think, I have an option here. I can respond as always, or I can do something different. And I know that if I can do something different, that will contribute to my growth, and it will probably be a better response to the other person.
Yeah, that's awesome. The way that I verbalize it or articulate it with my students is when the thing happens, when the stimulus happens, there's a gap of time between when that happens and when we either respond or react. Respond moves us forward, react does not.
I like that.
What I do with that time makes me who I am. When the stimulus comes, what I do with the time between that stimulus and my response or my reaction makes me who I am. I don't know if that's true, but that's a way that makes sense for me to understand the importance of exactly what you just shared, which I think is an awesome way to put a bow in this conversation is we have control, whether we recognize it or not.
Yeah.
And having the growth mindset enough to recognize that. And as we always talk about in this podcast, to recognize it, to have the awareness, and then to have the intention to do something about it, and then to actually do something about it is the action. Awareness, intention, action.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
It's awesome. Cool.
T-Riggers. Final words.
No, everybody just walked in my house and craziness ensues. The dogs are going nuts. The grandkids, they already have red hair, so they're crazy enough. I think that what Peter said. Peter, in my opinion, has a very candid way of breaking things down. For me, for sure, but I think that's one of his strengths as a teacher is being able to like kind of cut through all the crust and be like, here's what it means to, he says this is what it means to me, but I think that you have a really good knack, Peter, for distilling down what you've learned of things in order to teach them to other people. And I think that's a huge strength. But yeah, I think you said it perfectly. It's like what you do in that moment. It might not be all encompassing of this is who I am or who I may become, but it definitely gives you a better jumping off point to ponder what should I do at that point, or there is a point and what might I do there, right? Because I think a lot of people, they get lost in, like you said earlier, like this is the way I am, or I can't do it, I have no control over this. But really, ultimately we have a choice over almost everything except for, when we die. And that's pretty much, the crux of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think the piece that I left out in the conversation with right now is that I proceed that in this semester by telling my students that I believe that we are what we repeatedly do, or I am what I repeatedly do. So how I respond or react, not in that one situation, that's just, a one-off, but how I respond when that thing happens multiple times over the course of the day, the week, the month, the year, my life, that makes me who I am.
Yeah. Every instance, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's cool. I don't get to share my gratitude enough. I think that had I had a teacher like you, or even anybody that would have told me any of the ways that, like, never have I experienced going into a semester at school and they were like, here's what we're going to focus on this, for the next couple of weeks is what you do is who you become. Nobody ever said that. Nobody ever says that. I think that's really cool. So it's a gift you have.
My class ended, my mindset class ended, and a math class comes in and uses the same space in the next period or the next block, and there's like a 2-minute changeover time. So kids are entering for their math class. My kids are leaving from our Better Than Yesterday class. I heard one of the math kids say to one of my students, "What are you doing here?" Because there's, and I was just so excited to see how my student would respond. And my student stopped and thought for a minute. He goes, "It's really difficult to describe to you." He goes, "I think the easiest way to say it is we work on our mind." And I was like, boom, home run. Yes.
Awesome.
Like, yeah, you see. Yeah. So that was really cool.
And then it becomes a normal math class.
Right.
Right.
Very, very hard to explain to you math student what we do in here.
Nerds.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Well, I really do appreciate the two of you coming on tonight. Todd, I appreciate you fighting through the rigors to jump on with us for as long as you could. And Dr. Slammon, it's always a pleasure.
Same. Thank you. I appreciate it. I love getting together with you guys every time.
Our family listeners, we appreciate your ears. We thank you for your time. We are incredibly grateful for your attention. On behalf of myself, Dr. Wild Bill Slammon, and Todd Ellis, we are the School and Struggle Podcast. We are.
See ya.